Just by way of quick review, we started off this process by practicing patterns. Students drew patterns like these for about a week and a half. These are various patterns that I drew in class to demonstrate. We talked about cross-hatching and hatching, so that we're not going to have any solids, but all of our areas that are filled in are going to be filled in with hatch marks. The hatch marks can be straight or they can be curved based on the pattern. They can also be patterns like this that are more organic. In this case, a series of leaves on a vine. So after I demonstrated these in class, students drew various patterns like all of these, and then I gave them a quiz. The quiz was open book, and they drew 10 different patterns because we need a variety of patterns for the final. So again, these are just my samples that I did in class of the various patterns. I modeled these for them and then gave them the open book quiz. The next portion of the project was to take a letter of the alphabet and draw it in multiple ways. So this is the letter I, drawn very simply, drawn as a lowercase letter in various ways, in combination of an uppercase letter and lowercase letter by drawing dots on the I's. Also taught some of the students how to do a calligraphic I using 2 pencils. This is a very stylized italic I, and another very stylized italic I, as well as this one, which is based on that one, but it's more angular. After students drew at least 5 variations of a single letter, I asked them to place that letter in a rectangle that's 2 inches wide by 3 inches tall, which is what these grid sheets are. I demonstrated a variety of these in class, and then the students were asked to select one of these letters and put them in the box, again, that's 2 inches wide and 3 inches tall, to show me various compositions. After they laid those letters out in those compositions, we enlarged them to a full sheet of paper that has a seven and a half by 10 inch grid, and they drew their letters inside this after they showed them to me, and I could give them some suggestions. These are some student samples that my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students designed in class. They then transferred them, and I showed this on a previous video, they transferred them to a larger sheet of paper and then inked it so that it comes out looking like this example that I did in class, which you saw in the last video that I produced. So from here, the next step they're going to do is they're going to take all their various patterns that they've drawn, and they're going to lay out a composition that looks something like this. This is a sample that I showed. I also have it on my slideshows in Google Classroom. So they're taking all the various patterns, and what is notable about this is that when it crosses the line, the pattern changes. So you can see the background here is all one pattern. Goes up in here, goes all the way around here, and all the way around there. So that's going behind. In this case, if that were that same pattern, it's going to go in all these spaces here. I do allow for patterns to be used more than once. For instance, you can see that this part of the hand has these lightning bolt patterns, and since it's not touching, there's more lightning bolt patterns here as well. So as long as they're not side by side, a pattern can be repeated. The next step of this process is to draw patterns very lightly with a pencil. I also instructed students to use a cover sheet. So the cover sheet is put over the drawing like this, so that when a student puts their hand on it, it's not going to smudge the drawing. On this next step, students are going to draw patterns very lightly with a pencil and then later inked. This drawing has already been transferred and inked onto this 9-inch by 12-inch sheet of paper. And so now I'm just going to start laying in the patterns. Choose some of my favorite ones from all of my samples. And I think for the background on this one out here, I'm going to choose one of my favorites, and I'm going to do it at an angle. So I'm very lightly drawing diagonal lines, and I'm being very careful where I place them, because I don't want it to interfere with this portion of this letter. It's okay to rotate your drawing around to accommodate the space that you have on your table. So this starts off as a very simple checkerboard pattern, but here's where it changes. Inside the checkerboard, we're going to do this pattern right here. Very simply, it's 1/4 of each one of these squares with a diagonal line going like that, so that when you line them all up, it looks like a series of three-dimensional doors. And you can kind of tell as you're doing this how the pattern goes on the inside, so it's kind of a pattern within a pattern. If you imagine a line going across here and then up to what would be the corner, these patterns are going to go right to the very edge of the frame. Again, I'm going to imagine a line here. I can't see it all, but I know that this one is going to have those diagonal lines in it also. Once you get going on a pattern like this, I went a little bit too far on that, but that's okay because we can erase that later. The idea on this is to repeat the pattern and fill up that area. Again, I'm just barely touching the paper. The paper that we're drawing this final on is watercolor paper, and it accepts the pencil very well. So again, even though I can't see all of these shapes, I know that there's a line down the middle that covers the corner of each one of these rectangles, and then a line going up to the corner. It might seem a bit tedious to do this in pencil first. More advanced students who are comfortable with their patterns and comfortable drawing with an ink pen could probably go right to ink instead of having to do pencil first. But doing it in pencil first is kind of a fail-safe, meaning I want to make sure that they understand what they're doing before they go to the next step. So it could take upwards of a week for students to do this part of the project. As it happens, we have an entire week before the Thanksgiving break. So the students who are on the ball and are doing their work in class should have no problem at all completing this part of the project before the Thanksgiving break. In fact, we've got 6 working days to get that far. And I have no doubt I've got at least maybe a dozen students right now who are easily going to be ready for this portion of the project. So I filled in that area. I'm going to rotate this paper and do that same pattern in this area by starting with my diagonal lines. And I'm going to actually angle my sheet, my cover sheet, so that I can see the direction of the diagonal lines. So again, very lightly, about 1/2 inch apart. If students want to take it and do it slightly differently, they can actually make larger rectangles also. So they can play around with doing these lines larger or smaller, as long as the pattern holds up as it goes from there around this way. So here again, I'm going to sort of kind of put my paper out here to check the angle using my cover sheet. Not exactly as a ruler, but just as a guide. And since I went wider over here, I'm going to make these lines a little bit wider also. So the pattern appears to be getting larger as it goes away from the corner over there. You can kind of follow these lines. And once you get good at doing these and you kind of get into a groove, you can do the halfway mark all at the same time. This is the part of this particular exercise where students can play around a little bit. It becomes almost a game. What I mean by that is I'm doing all of the same line to keep them lined up this way and trying to keep the grid going that way as well. And you can see I just made a mistake there too. But that's okay, again, because we're going to do this in pencil first, and this is the advantage of doing it in pencil first and then inking over it. If you make mistakes like this, it's easy to come back after the fact, fix it when you're doing the ink, and then erase the pencil lines after the fact. And one more time, as I've said repeatedly, I'm drawing this very lightly. I don't want students to bear down on their pencil and do this really dark, because it's going to make erasing more difficult if these lines are drawn darkly. As I've said before, for me the cool thing about this exercise is you get into kind of a meditative state when you repeat the same thing over and over again. And as I've said also repeatedly, a lot of people do this kind of art as a form of meditation. So I'm just starting in the center of the box and drawing all of the horizontal lines in the center of the box all the way throughout the pattern. And then I can come back later and do all the vertical lines. And this is what I mean by sort of making a game out of it. You don't have to draw the exact same way step by step as long as you do all the steps. And this helps to keep your pattern more clean because I'm just skipping a line and drawing the same extended line as I go up the page. So once I've drawn all the vertical lines and all the horizontal lines, then I can go back in and do all the diagonal lines. And again, you'll notice I'm rotating the page around so that I can always keep my hand rested on my cover sheet, which acts as a shield. And then I can go in and do all these lines. To the diagonal. And you'll notice that the pattern breaks down just a little bit because I didn't draw them all precisely the same. And I messed up that one again, but I'm not going to worry about it. Anything that's drawn in pencil obviously can be fixed. It almost turns this into a puzzle. You start looking at which ones you've missed if you're not going in sequence, and also ones you made mistakes on, like this one. And I just noticed another mistake I made. I was doing my diagonal lines over here. This way I went in the opposite direction. It's an easy fix, but I just have to make sure when I do my final that I keep it consistent. So when I do the final in ink, when I get to this point, I'm making a mental note. You can kind of see where I messed up right there. I might at some point put a post-it note on here with a reminder that I need to fix those squares because I messed up the pattern. And this should give my students a little bit of relief, considering that if their teacher can make a mistake like that, it's okay for them to make a mistake too. But even when I'm doing my pencil marks, and even though I'm kind of getting into a groove here, meaning I'm getting the pattern down, I can go a little bit quicker, but I just have to be careful when I go to the next step that I don't get careless in some of my lines, like that one there is a little bit off. And like a typical perfectionist, I'm probably nitpicking my own drawing. But again, this is something that artists do, particularly artists who are perfectionists. But we're working in an imperfect medium, which is why it's better, in my opinion, to do it in pencil first before you commit to doing it in pen. It saves a lot of headaches later on. So here's where I got to make this right. It's this one and that one. It looks like I missed it here also. Working with pencil makes it a lot more forgiving, meaning it's okay to make mistakes in pencil because you can always go back and fix it later. So I'm going to rotate this around and continue that pattern going this way. And even if I change up the direction of the lines, as long as I keep going in the same diagonal this way, I can always fix it. Now, one of the things I mentioned to my students today during class is that I'm not going to put any more time in doing this than I'm allowing them in class. What that means is, in a typical 45-minute class, students have about 30 minutes of time that they can be productive, because we do a warm-up drawing every day, which I call the daily doodle. And there's a little bit of time to set up when they first start the class, sharpen their pencils, etc. And then there's a little more time at the end of the period to clean up. So I figure students have approximately 30 to 40 minutes to do these exercises, to do their drawings. So I'm not going to take any more than that amount of time on this drawing today. And since I did the inking and transfer on my other video earlier today, I'm coming up on 23 minutes. I'm going to finish doing this pencil sketch, and that's all I'm going to allow myself today on this lesson. So again, notice the method I'm using here. I'm doing all of the vertical lines inside each one of these shapes, and then I'll come back and do all the horizontal and then all the diagonal lines. So these lines are all starting at the center of each one of these rectangles, so that it's easy to keep track of where the patterns are going. And I can see that since I've switched around here, I'm doing the lines in the wrong direction again. But as I say very often, I am not going to lose any sleep over it. Meaning, if it's wrong, it's not that big of a deal. I can either fix it when I get to the next stage, or I can leave it that way and just make it an interesting puzzle for anyone viewing it to see if anybody notices the mistake I made. And the mistake's not that big of a deal. It's just the fill that goes inside these shapes. The lines are going in a different direction. And it's mainly because I'm right-handed. And so I always like to draw from left to right, the same way I write. And if I sit still long enough in my classroom in the afternoon, the light goes off because it's on a timer. Lets me know that it's time to probably finish this up and go home for the evening. But as I said before, you can really get into a meditative state when you do this. And when you're in that meditative state, it's very easy to lose track of time. For me, that's one of the joys of doing art. And this kind of art that doesn't take a lot of thinking. Even though, as I said, since I turned the corner up here, I reversed the pattern. When I get to the inking stage, I can choose whether or not to keep them going all in this direction or to ink right over the top of it in the opposite direction. It's not critical to the success of this drawing that it follows the exact same pattern, probably because of the pinch point up here at the top. So the lines were coming diagonal this way. When I got to the finger in between these fingers here, I just reversed it. As long as when I'm doing the inking of this drawing, I either fix it or alter it like I did here, and you can see right there at this point is where I switched the pattern up so that the diagonal lines were going in one direction here and another direction there. So as I'm closing in on 30 minutes, I'm just going to finish some of these lines and keep close contact with my timer. And I'm going to finish it up right at 30 minutes because, as I said, my other inking of this drawing took about 18 minutes to do. Never been a great mathematician. So 18 and 30 is 48 minutes. My favorite number. Some of these boxes are a little too small, but I think it makes for a more interesting drawing when things aren't perfectly symmetrical and identical. And that's just my opinion, for whatever it's worth. The one thing that I have lectured on repeatedly on this particular project is I don't want it to look like it was done with a computer or with AI. I want it to definitely look like it was hand-drawn, because it was hand-drawn. And only someone who has not had my class might look at it and say, oh yeah, that was done on the computer. Well, it was not in this case. And I've got the video evidence to prove it, as well as the mistakes that I made. So, if you're still watching this, I am going to end the timer almost exactly at 30 minutes. I just have a few more boxes to go. So I'm going to do these lines. And these lines. And the diagonal lines, and it's going to go just over 30 minutes. Diagonal this way, up to each corner. And lastly, to finish off this portion, this video, this is something that a student can do at home as well. As I've mentioned multiple times in class, I do not assign homework. But for any student who is behind in my classroom, in any of my classes, they can certainly take these drawings home and do this type of work from home, as long as they protect their artwork while they go. So tomorrow I'll add more patterns in pencil, and possibly over the weekend I will continue to ink it, but again, I'm not going to spend more time than I allow students, and that's enough work for 1 week.